Right, it's time to talk about Max Verstappen. We've gone too far now. It's time. It's time. I've had this video planned for quite a long time actually. Since this little streak that I'm about to talk about, that I've mentioned before, since it was looking a bit peak, but now it's got to a point where it's okay. Now we need to start having this conversation because over the course of the season and the way this season's going, by the end of this year, we could have something special on our hands, and we need to preempt that. Well, I want to preempt that. So this is the video I'm bringing to you guys. Max Verstappen, where does he rank all time right this minute now? So before anything else happens the rest of the season, where do people think he ranks right now? Are people aware statistically about where he is? Are people aware of what he's been doing for the last 30 races? Here I am to tell you all of it. Right, so I mentioned before about his little run he's been on. The run itself is 30 races. So the last 30 races Max Verstappen's had, he's won 14, which all the greats have about a 50% win ratio. So that's pretty unbelievable. So that's good in itself. He's come second 9 times, which again, the conversion rate, 23 out of 30. That means he's first or second, which is stupid. Then he's had 6 retirements and he's had 1 ninth place finish. So out of those 7 non-first or second places, let's go into them. First one, well, all the way back in Sakir 2020. Leclerc took him out on lap 1. Not really his fault. It was a bit of a dive bomb. He just took them both out and that's why he DNF'd. Then it went all the way to Baku last year, if you remember, where his tyre blew out. Red Bull were running the tyre pressures quite low, so it's a team fault. It wasn't his fault. Obviously, he was winning the race comfortably. His tyre blew out, ends up DNFing. Silverstone, as we all know, Hamilton hit his rear tyre, off he goes into the wall. Verstappen probably would have won that race as well, given the pace of the Red Bull at the time. So, again, another 1-2, first or second place, definitely ruined for him. Then Monza was obviously predominantly his fault, not 100%, but predominantly his fault. He wasn't going to come first or second in that race. He might have got second, but that would have been a tricky one. So this little run would have ended in Monza if he didn't take Hamilton out, end up on top of his car. That one would have been the only one that's probably questionable here, because then in Bahrain this year and Australia this year, his car broke down when he was in comfortable second place. So the last one is Hungary, when Valtteri Bottas couldn't control his car in the wet, hit Norris. Norris hit Verstappen. Verstappen's got, obviously because of the red flag, he managed to get back, get his car fixed. His car was terrible. Managed to get 9th still, which in and of itself is an achievement. But for the statistics, obviously doesn't give you a first or second. So if we really deep it, it's only really Italy that's the one. In the last 30 races, he will finish first or he'll finish second. And obviously this year, as you know, every race he's actually finished, he's won. So right now, without question, he's the best driver in Formula 1. Obviously, it's not really been a debate, I guess, since the start of the year, since Hamilton kind of dropped off a little bit. It's not to say Hamilton isn't still in that competition, but it's hard to judge him when he's not actually at the front anymore. So Verstappen, current world champion, currently the best driver in the world. Now, given how he started his career, he's youngest ever to win, youngest ever to start, 17 years old. He came in there straight away. So he's been at least very, very good from the very beginning. Like his first ever race, first ever season. Second season he won a race, which is at 17 years old, 18 years old. So as we push forward, you got to look at, the stats. So where's he ranking wins? Where's he ranking pole positions? Where's he ranking podiums? So if we look at the wins, now already I think a lot for people who don't know, or for people who aren't 100% clued in on stats, it might be quite surprising to see Verstappen quite high up on this. But what people don't realise is, well, first of all, there's only 34 world champions. I guess that's quite a lot. But if you think about it, since 1950. 70 seasons, 72 seasons. So that's not too bad. It's not like we've got a litany of champions. There's loads of people to pick from. There's only 34 champions. So that's kind of a good way to start. So if you look at this list, obviously you got the top 5 have got quite a lot of wins. Alonso and Mansell up in the 30s. Then everybody else, it kind of starts to group together from Stewart downwards. And there you see young Max Verstappen, 14th place or tied tied 11th, tied 12th, with a 3-time world champion, and then Nico Rosberg. So Nico Rosberg's quite a fascinating one. If you look at just literally compared to Nico Rosberg, he's got the same number of wins, slightly better win percentage because he's entered less races. Nico Rosberg got a lot more pole positions. Now, obviously, Nico was in a Mercedes, which is absolutely dominant for 3 years, 14, 15, and 16. So slightly skewed, but still, you got to be there, beating Lewis Hamilton. So I think Nico Rosberg doesn't figure in a lot of my comparisons just because he had 3 really good years, but he did beat Lewis Hamilton in one of them. So at Lewis Hamilton's peak. So that does count for something, but obviously in the grand scheme of things, you can't really rank him too high. So clearly, Max Verstappen, he's there or thereabouts, given that he's had a decent amount of races. I mean, he's had more races than Jackie Stewart. He's almost there with Niki Lauda. He's had way more races, obviously, than Jim Clark and Fangio, who only had like 9 races a season, and they raced when they're like 30, 40 years old. So that's kind of hard to kind of quantify. Ayrton Senna, I'm going to get back to Ayrton Senna in a minute. But if you kind of go through the different types of categories that you want to rank these guys, pole positions isn't Max Verstappen's strong point. So in terms of, as a driver, one lap speed isn't Max Verstappen's thing. It's definitely racecraft and race IQ. So when you're comparing them to, certainly the top three are absolutely gone. Sebastian Vettel had a dominant Red Bull. So Max Verstappen isn't going to figure highly at all unless they really pull out a car in the next 5-10 years. He's not going to figure on this list. So pole positions isn't a thing. And that does factor into, all-time great drivers. You need to be one lap speed, you need to have race IQ, you need to have all of it. So if there is a chink in the armour, it is pole positions, it is one lap speed. But we're criticising Max Verstappen one lap speed. It's not really, I don't think we can really do that. But, that's how I see it. And podiums is something that I find the most interesting, because that's literally what you're driving for. You're driving to, at the end of the day, get some kind of trophy. Like, that's the bare minimum. You want to get there, get to the podium, and get some champagne and get a little or a big trophy at the end of the day. And podiums is where he ranks very highly, and he's also got a very, very good podium percentage. Jackie Stewart down below him has got a very good percentage there at 43. Only above him, Senna at 50, Prost just around 50. Vettel is the same as Verstappen, and then Hamilton, Schumacher. So he's in the top group when it comes to one of my favourite stats, which is podium. So you can kind of see roughly where we're at. Like I mentioned, 34 world champions. That's where he ranks in wins and poles. Just for some meat on the bones. Now, I mentioned Ayrton Senna. Now, Ayrton Senna obviously is revered as one of the greatest of all time. He won 3 world championships. Ayrton Senna compared to Max Verstappen. So right now, Max Verstappen's a few races behind in terms of just outright race. He's obviously 3 seasons behind because, like I said, back in the day, they did way less races per season. So I look more at races rather than seasons. But seasons is relevant because every time you go into new seasons, new regulations, you get a lot more of a knowledge boost when you get a whole new, fresh regulation change, new cars, new tracks a lot of the time. So I brought up Max Verstappen and Ayrton Senna. So Ayrton Senna started at 24. So the age Max Verstappen is right now is when Ayrton Senna started in Formula One, which is relevant in some ways. It just shows you the progression of, well, I guess humans, but sports. You couldn't start at 17 back in the day because there just wasn't the facilities for it. But now they got the facilities for that, big man. So Max Verstappen started at 17. Ayrton Senna was nowhere near Formula One at 17. So I'm projected by the end of the season, there's 17 more races as of right now. So by the end of the season, Ayrton Senna and Max Verstappen will have raced about the same number of races. So 163, give or take. Obviously, more seasons for Ayrton Senna. Now, given that there's 17 more races, you could project Max Verstappen another 9 if he wins half the races from now on, which is, quite a big call. But I think he can do that. He'll still be about 10 short of Senna. So Senna would have a better win percentage than Max Verstappen. Pole positions, it won't even be close. Even if Max monopolises pole position from here, he'll still be halfway to Senna. So one lap speed, we know Senna's probably number one, number 2 with Hamilton. So you can't really compare him on that. Podiums, he'll be right there. Assuming Max gets, I'm giving Max 14 out of 17 podiums here to project. That's reasonable given what we've just said already. So he's finished first or second 23 out of 30 times. And then he would have, the percentages are wild. So I'm giving him quite a lot of podiums in this particular season because I don't think anyone's going to stop him outside of Ferrari. So podiums is going to be close. And let's say Max is the champion this year. He'll be on 2 and Senna will be on 3. Now, obviously, statistically, you still give the edge to Senna. But it's close. So if you didn't know already, this video is basically, if you didn't know already, here's a bit of meat on the bones just to kind of give you an actual, no, this is actually what's happening. This is the actual rankings right now. Statistically, this is what he's on. And this is what he could be on. So for me, I've got various tiers of driver. Now, this is by no means fact. And the biggest caveat to all of this is I've not seen half of these drivers drive week in, week out. So my opinion on people like Jack Brabham, Nelson Piquet is kind of irrelevant. It's just based on what they did statistically, and you can only go off that. So, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. Now, Max Verstappen, for me, is currently in tier 4. By the end of this season, he could get to tier 3. So, tier 3 and tier 4 is a mix of drivers who either have won one world championship or maybe 2. And in case of Jack Brabham, like I personally, and this is just my own personal opinion, the older days, you can't compare them directly. You can only statistically compare them. And you've got to assume that the stuff that they're doing now is more impressive, a lot more technologically advanced. And I would personally rank, if Verstappen gets 2, you'd probably put that above what people were doing in the olden days with 9 races, 10 races a season. That's just my personal opinion. Everyone drop in the comments if you disagree. So for me, there's a big group of people round about Brabham, Ascari, Fittipaldi, Hakkinen, and Graham Hill. Now, they're the guys that Verstappen can get to. If he wins as I projected, if he wins the World Championship this year, gets all those race wins, for me, he can get into that group. Now, Mika Hakkinen is a good example. Like, he had 3 good years, like good years, like championship contending years. 1, 2 World Championships. His stats, compared to Verstappen, especially by the end of the season, are going to be close. Podiums. Verstappen will be above him, Hakkinen, statistically. And Hakkinen's longevity wasn't one of his strong points. So he could easily go above Hakkinen. But for me, to get Verstappen into Jim Clark, Jim Clark is kind of the gatekeeper because he was definitely well above his time. His like a 50% win rate. Pole position was crazy. He died young, relatively young. So he could have been way higher on this list. So he's kind of the gatekeeper to the top 10, in my personal opinion. Now, to get into that top 10, you have to win 3 world. You have to win again and again and again. So this next championship for Verstappen, if he wins it, gets him certifiably in that tier 3, along with the guys I mentioned: Brabham, Ascari, Fittipaldi, Hakkinen, and Hill. Now, currently, Raikkonen, James Hunt, Nigel Mansell, and Fernando Alonso. Like, you guys tell me, those names I just mentioned: Raikkonen, Hunt, Mansell, Alonso, Verstappen, and then you could probably say even Damon Hill, Nico Rosberg. It sounds about right. I know Verstappen is currently the best driver in the world, and those guys, I guess they were all the best in the world at one point, but all those names probably sound quite similar to me. Do they sound similar to you at the minute? Like, in my opinion, that's where Verstappen belongs right now, like, for sure. You could argue that he's up there with Hakkinen right now. Be tough to do given he's only won World Championship, and I think most people, even if you're not a stats guy, would definitely agree that, come on, you need to start getting him getting him in the right category for what he's won right now. Now, that's not to say in 3 years' time he couldn't be in that top 10, because if he wins back to back now and he's on 3, he could easily be in there with Lauda, Piquet, and Stewart. Like, he could be in top 10 very, very soon. But for now, I'm putting him in the top 20. Top 15, we could argue. I'm open to a debate for a top 15. But right now, Max Verstappen is top 20 all time, in my personal opinion. Now, he's got some challenges, obviously. First of all, I say first of all because the first one's going to expire the quickest. Lewis Hamilton. So Hamilton has got, I would say, 3 years maximum. If this year gets rectified, and they've got a good car for next year, and then the year after that, just before the new engine regulations 2026, he might stick around. If it goes really badly this year, next year will be his last year. So Hamilton, as long as Hamilton's in the driver lineup, Verstappen's got a problem. When he goes, you've got Leclerc, Russell, and Norris. They're the next three in their own respective teams. As long as none of them do anything crazy and go to like, a startup project and go to Aston Martin or Porsche when they come in. So Russell and Leclerc specifically are the two that can stop Max Verstappen rising the ranks quickly. And everybody needs a Hakkinen Schumacher. Everyone needs an opposite. So a big rival. And I think Leclerc's proving this year that he can do that. But Verstappen is the best of the three, and he's had the most experience of the three. So if people let Max Verstappen get some momentum and go downhill, it could get peak for everybody, and Max Verstappen could end up in that top 5 very, very soon. Like if he goes on a Schumacher or Hamilton run, if he wins 4 out of the next 5 world championships, he'll be a 5-time world champion, and people will be like, right, then people are going to have to look inside themselves and then look at their own Ayrton Senna and be like, okay, cool, maybe. Because I can see people wanting to get rid of Prost and Vettel, just generally. The slander on those two is ridiculous. But I think that top 3 of Hamilton, Schumacher and Senna is going to get challenged if Verstappen reels off like 4 the next 5. Then we're talking about getting up to 7, or maybe 8 if Hamilton wins another one. So for me, there's a lot still to do, but that's how I see it. That's how I personally see it. Max Verstappen is right now the best driver head and shoulders in Formula 1, and he's impressing week on week on week with the pressure he's been put under. Obviously, last year he impressed in the main. Not every single race, but mostly he impressed, and he did get a world championship at the end. No matter how it happened, he did get a world championship. So for me, Verstappen is currently an all-time great in the sense that he's in the top 20, and there's been hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of Formula 1 drivers. So he's an all-time great. But let's make sure we know where we're talking about. We're not talking about Senna and Prost right now. We're not talking about Fangio. We're not talking about Lauda. We're talking about a top 20. We're talking about getting above, the likes of Brabham, Hakkinen, Fittipaldi, Alonso, depending on how you rate him. That's kind of how I see it. But let me know in the comments if you disagree strongly, and if there's anybody else in here that I've just casually thrown up there in the top 10 that you're thinking, hold on, I don't think he deserves to be there. Or if I've missed anyone else completely. I know Nico Rosberg's there. I know Damon Hill's there. I haven't really mentioned those two guys too much. But let me know in the comments, and I'll be back soon with some more.